Analogue. Love them or hate them, or maybe don't even know who they are, their hardware design is undeniably beautiful. They focus on high-end FPGA hardware. Basically, what if I had a modern console to play my retro games on? FPGA is a way to achieve perfect hardware emulation. That phrase is probably going to get ripped apart in the comments, but there's a lot of controversy about the exact way to describe what Analogue's hardware does. But at the end of the day, Analogue is focused on hardware emulation, simulation, replication, whatever you want to call it. It is not software emulation. It even says so all over their website. They've previously released consoles to play Nintendo, Super Nintendo, and Sega Genesis, and more recently announced that they'll be releasing a console capable of N64 and a separate console capable of CD-based systems like TurboGrafx, PC Engine, and SuperGrafx. These are options to play your real physical games on incredibly designed hardware made for the modern era of gaming. The one that seems to have hit the biggest is the Analogue Pocket. It's their portable console for handheld gaming. Out of the box, it's capable of Game Boy, Game Boy Color, and Game Boy Advance, but there's even attachments for more portable systems as well. I've been lucky enough to get my hands on the Analogue Pocket 5 times. It's an expensive, bad habit. I don't even use the Analogue as much as I would like to. It's always just feeling too premium to throw into a bag or take on a subway. Recently, Bob over on Wolf Den made a video where he bought a CNC metal shell for his Analogue Pocket. It looked super sleek, and made me feel it's the spark I needed to get me to play my Analogue Pocket more. I was about to pull the trigger and do the mod myself, when Analogue pops out and says, "Hey, we're doing aluminum shells now. The cost is astronomical, $500. But I was gonna do it myself for almost the same price. You can fault Analogue for creating an economy of scalpers for their devices, but you can't deny that Analogue's devices are incredible looking. The aluminum natural shell is no exception. Compared to the black, glow-in-the-dark, blue and indigo colorways, an all-metal shell just stands out above the rest. It feels incredibly premium. Not that the others don't feel premium too, but the aluminum is just in a class of its own. The Analogue Pocket has a 3.5-inch screen with an aspect ratio of 10:9, so that it fits Game Boy games perfectly. This means that we're getting a 10x pixel-perfect upscale for those games. Controller-wise, the D-pad feels great, and the face buttons keep their half-concave, half-convex style even on the aluminum edition. There's no labels on the buttons either, which I think more handheld makers should follow, especially when these devices are meant to be so diverse. We have left and right buttons on the back, and they're nice and clicky. On the left side is our volume rocker and power button. On the other side is a micro SD card slot. On the bottom is our USB-C charging port, a link cable port, and a 3.5mm headphone jack. The cartridge slot on the back by default works for Game Boy, Game Boy Color, and Game Boy Advance games, but there's attachments that you can buy for Game Gear and Atari Lynx. There's also a bunch of other accessories available, and some of them that are worth calling out include a dock that will let you charge your device and also let you play your games on your TV and connect a Bluetooth controller. Analogue sells screen protectors, but I use a brand off Amazon that is really high quality and much less expensive. They also make these nice hard shell cases. It's a little conflicting because the hard case makes this more of a display piece than a pick up and go device, but we'll get into that later. The Analogue Pocket can be picked up for a pretty reasonable $220. The aluminum edition here is $500. Quite less reasonable considering it's the price of 2 Analogue Pockets plus a few games. But I guess that's the price of premium. The aluminum shell models come in natural, noir, black, and indigo. Indigo is already sold out, but the others are still available while quantities last. You can also always pick up the black or white models, which are usually more readily available and much less expensive. Their website is a nice taunt of all the editions that nobody can get their hands on. Analogue Pocket comes preloaded with their own home-baked Analogue OS. They have some ambitious plans with their OS, but in its current state it already does quite a lot, and even still, there's actually not much to say about it, and that's not a bad thing. The Analogue OS overall is an incredible interface. Its sole focus is to get you into your game, but also give you a powerful subset of features to enhance that gaming experience. Simply, it gets out of the way and makes tuning your gaming experience insanely easy. You can change different display modes for your games, whether you want a more authentic experience, a more nostalgic experience, or a more modern one. There's a fun game library that lets you keep a running list of games that you've played on the Pocket. and it can even serve as a game dev unit with support for GB Studio. There's another fun feature that lets you compose 8-bit style music as well. Out of the box, Game Boy, Game Boy Color, and Game Boy Advance are literally plug and play. There are some pretty cool features to take advantage of too. Even though these are physical cartridges, you can actually use save states. Kind of crazy that you can mix these two things together. You can also change display modes, or adjust physical hardware settings to determine how the game should treat the Analogue Pocket. For example, if you have Link's Awakening DX, it will default to the Game Boy Color hardware, but you can force it to detect it as the DMG Game Boy model instead. That's not really a useful example, but it's possible. An actual useful example is Oracle Seasons or Oracle of Ages, which has a special shop for Game Boy Advance. You can force that detection here. One of the more recent big enhancements for the Analogue Pocket is the ability to install cores onto the Pocket. Cores are like emulators. My high-level understanding, and you can let me know down in the comments, is that they tell the FPGA chip how to emulate the hardware of a console. So they aren't just existing software emulators, but they have to be explicitly built for the FPGA chip that powers the Analogue Pocket. Well, with the introduction of cores, we actually end up really being able to get a ton more out of the Pocket. We're no longer tied down by just our physical cartridges. So now we can install Game Boy cores, plop some ROMs on that microSD card, and you'll have everything that's great about the Pocket and your entire library of games on the go. This extends far beyond just Game Boy though. There are tons of cores that are just full games sometimes too. The ones that I care about the most are the Game Boy cores and the Super Nintendo core. But like I said, there's a whole world of them to explore. Luckily, it's also easy to get them all set up and see which ones you want. There's a few applications that can help you with that, but I've been using one called Pocket Sync. Just install it on your computer, plug in your Pocket with a microSD card installed, or plug the microSD card directly into a card reader, select it from the Pocket Sync app, and you'll be able to install cores and easily be shown where you need to navigate to add your ROM files. The Open FPGA menu item on your Analogue Pocket is organized by consoles and handheld consoles, and just select one, choose a game, and you're good to go. Unique to these cores compared to software emulation or the Analogue Pocket out of the box is that they need BIOS files, but I'm sure you know how to use Google to find those, right? So if it's not clear already, I think Analogue Pocket is absolutely top tier, and the aluminum shell model is really just luxury Game Boy gaming at its finest. But what if you only care about Game Boy and Game Boy Color games? You still want to use physical cartridges, and you don't want to spend $500 or even $200. The company FunnyPlaying released a really solid option. They call it the FPGBC, which is kind of a mouthful. It's a bit more DIY since you need to buy the board and then separately pick up the shell and buttons, but it's awesome that you can really make your own custom-looking Game Boy, complete with the Nintendo logo. You need to piece it together yourself, but you can definitely do it in about 30 minutes or less, even if you've never done Game Boy mods before. It's not perfect, but for $90, you get a Game Boy that supports USB-C charging, your original cartridges, and even a decent amount of flash carts. I say it's not perfect because the menus are a little janky, although you can get them to work just fine. And if you want the original Nintendo boot screen, you'll have to do a firmware upgrade. There could be some games also that don't work perfectly, but they should be far and few between. Of course, you're also only getting Game Boy and Game Boy Color games from this. No Game Boy Advance compared to the Pocket, but I've actually heard rumors that FunnyPlaying is working on a GBA version as well. All of this is to say that the Analogue Pocket is an absolutely incredible device. The aluminum model is insanely unnecessary. If I wasn't making this video, there's pretty much a 0% chance I would have even bought it to begin with. $500 is an incredibly hard to rationalize price tag. $200 is more reasonable, but also understandably expensive. I love that FunnyPlaying has an option that's just a fraction of what Analogue's hardware cost. Sure, it's only Game Boy and Game Boy Color, but it's also only $90. And it's really cool that it's kind of hidden behind an OEM-looking shell. I can say that I'm really glad that I own the Pocket, because it's just an absolutely amazing device, from the software to the hardware to the actual gaming experience. But I don't know if this is going to be my push to make me feel more comfortable throwing it in my bag and taking it with me on trips. It's worth it if you're looking for a new way to experience your physical games though. If you are looking for a Pocket, I'd probably recommend the $200 black or white models over the $500 aluminum though. Anyway, those are just my thoughts. What do you think of the Analogue Pocket? Do you already have one? Is the metal one absolutely ridiculous? Do you have the FPGBC instead? Are you sticking to software emulation? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. Feel free to subscribe down below if you enjoyed this video, And thanks for watching. I bought a $500 Analogue Pocket just so I can play Tetris.